This is my latest project, a scissor lift workbench which also serves as a portable plunge saw station and also a miter saw station. I've seen several scissor lifting tables used as a workbench, and being able to adjust the workbench's height seems really useful. That's why I thought I'd create my own version of this idea and add some interesting functions to it. These are the plans you'll find for sale on my website. I'll leave a link in the video description in case you're interested in making this tool or collaborating with my work. I'm going to install 2 extension tables to achieve a larger work surface on the workbench. I'll use the same extension system to install the other 2 tables for the miter saw. I think it's a perfect tool for a small workshop, allowing you to use the same workbench with several of the most common woodworking tools. Besides, I can use this workbench as an outfeed-infeed table with my bandsaw or my jointer. I can also use it as a cart. This will be the usual emplacement of this workbench in my workshop. Normally, the miter saw would be on top, but I've come up with a system that will allow me to reconfigure the workbench to use with a blunt saw in only a few seconds. I'll showcase this in the next video, and of course, you can also see it in the plans. In my case, I used the scissor lift table which the folks at Rui sent to me. I think it's the perfect complement for this project, although it can be pricey for non-professional users. You can see it here on their online store, along with the accessories to use with this kind of lifting table. I'll leave a link to their interesting website in the video description. To build a workbench, I cut some dados on the underside of the top so I can attach some interior divisions. I'm going to move the workbench and remove the miter saw so that we can see it in detail. The wheels with brakes are really useful to keep it locked in any location. I've used the MTF clamping system. It will allow me to use all the typical accessories of this system, such as bench dogs and clamps. I instructed the place where I bought and had the plywood cut to drill the holes. They used a CNC, which is why they're all perfectly straight and at the exact distance. They can also be drilled at home in other ways, which you can see in the article in the video description. In the front and back, I cut 2 dovetail channels so that I can hold workpieces vertically. Also, I explain in detail this and other possible clamping systems for this workbench in the article I'll share in the video description. The minimum height of this bench is around 52 centimeters. This height is perfect for working with medium-sized furniture or workpieces. The maximum height is around 113 centimeters. The workbench is 121 centimeters wide and 70 centimeters deep. The folks at Rui have also sent me some accessories like this T-track aluminum profiles. They're fastened to the workbench with some clamping levers that will make the installation process very convenient and quick. The profiles have an anti-slip rubber strip glued to a piece of plywood, which is screwed to one of their sides. It's very practical to prevent the pieces from moving while working. This, along with the extra height of this workbench, makes it easier to do some of the work processes. These profiles also allow me to hold workpieces vertically using clamps for T-track profiles. This will be useful for joining 2 boards with screws or working on the edges of a workpiece. Another interesting function of these profiles is gluing wood pieces to make cutting boards. The smooth, straight surface of the profiles and the possibility of clamping them from above will help me get straighter cutting boards. Some other accessories they sent me are some clamps to use with this MTF clamping system. I'm sure they'll come in handy on more than one occasion. These are the pieces on which the extension tables rest. I've noticed the ones on this side warp on the top when tightening the locking knob. I'm going to glue a piece of PVC on the cut to stop this from happening. You can see the system I used to be able to use the extension tables. These 4 aluminum pipes are inserted into some holes in the interior divisions. Mounting the extension tables is really easy. You only have to pull toward the exterior piece and separate the middle piece a little. The table stays locked thanks to 3 pieces of steel rod and a plywood strip that's inserted under the top of the workbench. Finally, all that's left to do is to tighten the 2 adjustable handles. With these 2 extension tables installed, this workbench is about 220 centimeters long. The extension tables are fairly firm and stable when locked. The aluminum pipes make it possible to extend them a further 30 centimeters. When fully extended, I can have a work surface of about 280 centimeters. Logically, when they're extended, they're not as firm, but it's enough to support boards on the workbench to cut them. I'm going to install the necessary accessories to be able to use the plunge saw. First, the saw guide's back rail bracket. It was sent to me by the people at Dashboard. It's made in aluminum and will be perfect for use with this workbench. In order to fasten it to the back and front of the workbench, I built some hardwood dovetails. The original accessories for this fastening system are quite expensive, and besides, I wanted to make them a little bigger so that they fit more tightly in the channel. Now I'll mount the front guide bracket and the saw rail. These are the 2 supports I made to place and hold the aluminum fences. The channel of the fences fits into a piece of hardwood, and the hammerhead T-nut secures the profile to the support. This is a safe and convenient system. The wood will stop the profile from moving, and with this kind of nut I can install it from above. I'm going to make the first cut on the workbench top. First, I make sure the saw can slide without issue. I lock the guide rail brackets and use 2 pieces of plywood as spacers to square the saw rail with the aluminum fences. As the holes in the top are perfectly straight, this system should work. I'm planning on making a 0 clearance insert for the workbench top in the cutting area. Now I'm going to check if the cuts are square. I cut a piece of a board whose long sides are parallel to one another. After cutting, I turn it and push it against the fence one more time. If everything is correct, the cut mark on the top and the edge should be perfectly parallel. Otherwise, I would have to move the guide rail brackets toward the appropriate side. The maximum cut length with this workbench is about 73 centimeters. From the cutting area to the edge of the left extension table, the distance is approximately 158 centimeters. This means I can cut work pieces up to 250 centimeters in length approximately, without the typical and inconvenient wobbling. On the right side, the distance is approximately 120 centimeters. These are the T-track flip stops I built for this project. By turning a knob, I can extend an aluminum fence and the T-track stop. When the stop is fully extended, it isn't too steady, but just enough to act as a stop. With this configuration, I can achieve a cutting length of around 202 centimeters. On the right side, the aluminum fence is a little shorter. Here I managed to get a cutting length of 125 centimeters approximately. I think these are acceptable dimensions, considering the modest original size of this workbench. It will be more than enough for small woodworking and DIY workshops. The support for the aluminum fences can be adjusted in height. This way I can lower them so they won't get in the way when working on the workbench. I'm going to build the size of the miter saw holder. First, we have to mark all the cuts with a pencil. Now I'll use the plunge saw, and I'm also going to set the stops so that the two sides are perfectly equal. I have to lower the front guide rail bracket to make the longest cut. I'll finish the job with a jigsaw. Now I'll showcase how fast it is to disassemble this tool to store it against the wall. First, I'll detach the saw rail. I'm going to leave part of the rail bracket that is fastened to the workbench. It doesn't get in the way at all, and it will make it easier and faster to reconfigure the workbench to use it with the plunge saw. Now I remove the aluminum fences. I'm also going to lower the supports of the aluminum fences so that they're flush with the workbench top. Finally, I'll remove both extension tables. This is how the workbench looks when up against the wall, with the back accessories installed. Nowadays, there are relatively cheap hydraulic lift table carts that can also be adapted to this design. I wrote a new article where I talk in detail about the various lifting table options that can be used. I also explain how to modify this design to change its dimensions. I'll leave a link in the description of this video. Now I'll show you how to build this workbench. Here you can see that in order to make the job easier, I ordered some of the materials cut to size. This cart was perfect for carrying the material around the workshop. As you can see, this piece of trailer plywood is very warped. I wasn't able to get a flatter one, but thanks to the interior divisions of this workbench, this shouldn't be a problem. I'm going to flip over the top to cut some dados that will allow me to glue on the interior divisions. As it's so warped, I'm going to try to cut the dados in a different way than the usual one. I'll stick on the front and back parts with masking tape. I'll use this marking gauge I made a few years ago to position the plunge saw rail. I adjust the depth of the saw and make the first cut. Now I'll use a spacer to move the rail and get a dado that's the same thickness as the board I'm going to use. This spacer should have the same thickness as the board, minus the thickness of the saw blade. After that, I only have to do some other runs that are evenly spaced. To position the saw rail and cut the other dados, I'll use a longer jig. A table saw with a dado blade could also be used to cut these dados. You can also use a handheld router and a rail. At any rate, at first it's best to run some tests on another piece of plywood. I'll use a router to bezel all the holes in the top. Now it's time to cut the 3 pieces at a 45-degree angle. I'll use the Plunge saw and its rail again. This time I'll use the rail's clamps to stop it from moving. First I make a cut 2 mm away from the edge, and a second cut to finish the miter joint. The process is a little more complicated with the 2 small plywood strips. Here I'm going to use a rubber base to immobilize the plywood. To stick the 3 pieces together, I was planning on using the masking tape method, but I've noticed the bond isn't strong enough on the slip-free side of the board. Finally, I'll use the air nailer. I make sure they're square. I've ordered slightly longer interior divisions so I can cut them to size in the workshop. I'll use a precision marking ruler to mark the position of the necessary holes. This tool makes these kinds of jobs easier and better. It's important to mark each piece with its reference to avoid any confusion. I don't have a bit with the largest diameter I need, so I'll use the same bit for all the holes. I'll try to make the holes that are supposed to be of a larger diameter bigger with a spindle sander. Before applying glue, I'll make sure everything is correct. It looks like the aluminum pipes fit into their holes without issue. I apply glue with a brush and start placing the clamps, trying to leave everything square. Once the glue is dry, I'm going to see how it looks on top of the workbench's lift table. As I was expecting, I have to place 2 strips of plywood to adjust the workbench to the upper frame of the table. This time I'll use screws. This is optional. The project will work without any problems, even if you don't install these 2 strips. Just now I noticed I forgot something. I didn't cut the channels in the front and back of the workbench. It would be easier to do this before gluing the workbench together. I'll try to cut them now with a table saw and router table. It's time to fasten the workbench to the lift table's frame. I've screwed on 2 plywood strips to add thickness to this part where the screws will go. First, I'll mark the position of the screw so I can drill some holes. Now I'll machine the 4 parts of the extensions. I also cut them a little longer to adapt them to the design. I drilled 2 holes in one of them and will use it as a jig to drill the other part. I make the cut that's needed to lock them with a table saw. I insert the threaded rod piece so that I can cut it later to the required length. I cut the 4 parts that are to be screwed to the underside of the extensions. I used semi-hard fir wood. They're a little broader and thicker than the ones in the original design, because the tops of the extensions are also warped. I hope I can straighten them this way. I drill all the necessary holes and fasten them with screws. I also use this opportunity to screw on another strip of plywood that will help me flush the extension tops with a workbench top. I'm going to make sure the extensions work correctly, and that seems to be the case. Now I'll use them to mark the position of the holes in the other parts. The dowel centers will come in handy for this job. Once marked, I drill the holes with a column drill. I'm going to cut the steel rod to size and bezel its ends. I glue them on with cyanoacrylate. I test the system again, and it seems this design is working wonderfully. As expected, the extensions are not flush with the workbench top. To solve this, I'm going to build and install the 4 locking pieces. I drill all the necessary holes in them with a column drill. Right after that, I make a cut that will allow me to lock the extensions on the table saw. I have to drill the holes for the threaded rod in 2 goes. My column drill can't quite drill this hole in 1 go. I make a hole just like before so that I can install the threaded rod. I run some tests and everything is working properly. It's time to fasten them to the workbench. To do this, I fit the extensions again. The first of the pieces must have a little play, as shown in this picture, so that I can lift the extension as required. Now I only have to level the extension table and fasten the pieces I just built. Now I'm going to mark all the necessary holes to make the supports of the fences. I drill all the holes and finish the job with a table saw. To cut the channel to adjust its height, I'll use a jigsaw and a drill bit as a router bit. I follow the same steps with these two other pieces, and I cut another channel in these ones with a dado blade and in the table saw. They're going to be used to insert the lock of the fences. Now all that's left is to screw the two pieces together. Even though this isn't in the plans, I drilled another hole to insert the dowel and strengthen the bond. I finished cutting the channel with a chisel. I also adjust the thickness of the piece of wood that will act as a lock for the fences and glue it on with cyanoacrylate. With another piece of wood, I'm going to make the dovetails. I'll use the same bit as earlier. I made them a little bit bigger so that I can adjust them with a file. All that's left now is to drill a hole in them and carve out a little wood so I can place a T-bolt. I've sanded the bolt head a little. That's all for today. In a few days I'll post the next video in this series. See you soon.